And we're just very happy to have two experts in user design. They both have PhDs, even though one of them did not send me her information. And they're both doing research. So currently they're at Adobe, and I think they're going to tell us about sort of their path here, what they do. And I know some of you are interested in this area, so feel free to ask questions about directions, like what would you advise me to do? So, and so we have Sharma and Mira.
I'm Sharma and Mira. Thank you. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. We have a bunch of slides ready, and we're going to tell you about both our careers, how we got where we are today, and also we'll kind of dive a little deeper into a project that we've both been involved in over the last several years. And but we hope to keep this informal. There are not a lot of you here, so if you have a question, definitely raise your hand and ask away. So should we get started? Oh, I'm going to move this. This is weird static. Can you guys hear kind of this weird static? Hopefully not. Okay. If it's a problem, let me know. So the title of our talk is The Many Sides of Research in Technology. Now, how many of you here have done research before or have a sense for what research might mean? A few of you. So that's great. So I wasn't sure, we weren't sure exactly how much you guys would know about what research is. And so we thought we'd start with the definition, like every good computer science talk. So what is research? So research is careful or diligent search. It's really about finding information. It's about searching for an answer, searching for knowledge. Research is studious inquiry or examination, especially investigation or experimentation aimed at the discovery and interpretation of facts. Key things here: investigation, experimentation. We're going to talk a lot about experiments. How do we decide what to do? How do we decide what the next great product is? We do a lot of experimentation. Finally, the collecting of information about a particular subject. So research is deep. We go deep into our topics. When we go to work on a problem, we dive really, really deeply and try to understand it as well as we can. So Sharma and I, we do a lot of different things in our jobs. We spend a lot of time observing how people use our products. I'm guessing you know what some of Adobe's products are, but maybe we'll just make sure you know. Can some of you tell me what are your favorite Adobe products? Reader and Photoshop. Great. I'm happy to hear Reader, because most often when people tell me Reader, it's like, what is that software that keeps asking me to update?
Adobe.
That Adobe keeps asking me. So I'm happy to hear one of you at least who likes Reader. But Photoshop is one of our flagship products, one that has been around actually for 25 years. Believe it or not, we just celebrated Photoshop's 25th birthday. So we do a lot of observation. We do a lot of interviews. We actually go out into the field and interview people who are using our products. We try to set the context of how they're using the products. What kinds of tasks are they trying to accomplish? And we build prototypes. We say, well, we really want to make Photoshop better. How could we make it better? And so we build many different prototypes, and we put them out, and we see, okay, if you use this prototype versus this prototype, are you able to get your work done faster or more easily? And finally, when we can, we actually do large-scale quantitative evaluations. So when products go out in the world, they're instrumented often, and we try to understand how are people using them. So with further ado, I'm going to let Sharma take it from here.
So, I picked this particular image because it mimics my career path a lot. So, how does one become a researcher in a software company? There are lots of ways to get there. Mine was perhaps a long and windy road, or an evolution, as I like to tell people, but not an uncommon one. So, I'm a user researcher and a designer. Actually, I'm a designer now, so it evolved even further. But I started out as a psychologist. I actually, when I was 18 years old, had decided to either come to Mills or go to Reed College, which was near my house. And so I ended up going to Reed because it was closer to home. But I was like ready to sign on the dotted line. So I haven't actually been back in one of these buildings for, 30 years, and it's kind of weird. Anyway, So I started out as a psychologist, a cognitive psychologist. I studied how the brain worked. And I fell in love with cognitive psychology because I really like to solve puzzles. I liked to identify a problem that I wanted to know an answer to, and then figure out ways to explore that problem until I came to an answer that I felt satisfied the data. And so I really loved that, and I wanted to become a professor. So I went off to grad school to get a PhD in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. And after getting a PhD and doing a couple years of a postdoc, I thought, well, I now know a whole lot about how the brain works. And in particular, I know a whole lot about how the visual system works, because I studied vision. And I don't want to be a professor. So, no offense to professors in the room, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be. And it was at the beginning of the internet, and people were making websites, and their websites were ugly and hard to read and hard to use, and they didn't make any sense. And I was sitting there thinking, there's got to be a way that someone will pay me to help them figure out how best to make their websites. And a friend of mine said, yeah, it's called usability engineering. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I wanted to go back home to Seattle. Turns out Microsoft was hiring for what I did, and the thing they were looking for was people with a PhD in cognitive science. So I was like, oh, sign me up. So I went to Microsoft, and one of the projects I worked on early on at Microsoft was on PowerPoint, studying designers and looking at how designers communicate information. So I spent a lot of time studying designers, and then when I decided to move to the Bay Area a few years later, I went to Adobe, and I was like, hey, I have all this experience studying designers, and you make software for designers, so good match. And sure enough, it was. So I came to Adobe, and I started doing a bunch of research on designers, and I spent the next 10 years studying designers, eventually to the point of becoming one. So I'm now, I call myself a design strategist, which means I do research and design kind of all in one. And it allows me to start from the beginning of a problem space of like, how do you make Photoshop easier to use? Well, I understand I understand all the tools to go out and figure that out, and then I can come back, and instead of trying to communicate that to another person, I help make the design. And later on in the talk, I'm going to show you some of that work that I've been doing. Mira had a slightly more conventional path, but
Yeah, so my path was a little different. So when I was in high school and thinking about what I wanted to be, I at first really wanted to be a marine biologist. I decided that whales were my thing and I was going to be a marine biologist. But really, I was really good at math and science, and I really loved art. And my parents, my dad's a mathematician and my mom is an electrical engineer, they said there is no way you're going to be an artist. Like, just forget about it. Like, we came to this country, you're going to be a productive professional. So, but I loved art. I loved I loved drawing. I loved spending time in dark rooms. And so I found that there was this emerging field of computer graphics and virtual reality that was allowing me to blend those two passions. So, this was at this point in the middle of the 90s, and so virtual reality, like websites, did not look very good. And computer graphics was really in its infancy. I mean, this is before any of your amazing Pixar movies that all of us see today. But that I was really excited about. I was like, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to have a career doing computer graphics. And so that meant I had to take programming and become a computer scientist. So I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan, and was a computer engineering major there. And when it came time to graduate, I felt like, gosh, I had only taken 1 or 2 classes. There was no way I was done. How was I going to go become a computer graphics person if I didn't know really the field? So I applied to graduate schools, and it seemed like, the right thing to do. So I applied to PhD programs and moved to Seattle, just like Sharma, to study computer graphics at the University of Washington. And with every PhD, there's always kind of, not for everyone, but for many people, there's this turning point where you have to decide, is this really worth the PhD, or should I just get out now once I have my master's? And so for me, it was a very conscious decision, because there were a lot of people leaving, and grad school is hard. And so I spent a lot of time thinking hard about, do I really need a PhD for what I want to do? Eventually, I decided that yes, I do. And the reason I needed that PhD is because I really wanted to be able to wear a lot of hats in my job, and one of the things that I love about my job is that I get to do lots of different things. So as a researcher at Adobe, I invent new technology that makes our products easier to use, or I invent new products altogether. And there's very few roles where you get to do that and you have the freedom to do that, right? So, and it's in the research teams in these big companies where you have the freedom to experiment, to really try out new things and fail and eventually succeed. And so that PhD was worth it. I finished almost, I guess, 7 years ago now, and I've been at Adobe ever since. And I'll show you some of the projects that I've been involved in since then. So next, we'll deep dive into one of the products that we've both been excited about and interested in, and show you kind of the two parts of research and how they come together.
Any questions? We're not going to talk much more about our career path, so any questions?
But we're happy to also
Yeah.
come back to that at the end too. More questions.
So, before we get started, one of the things that Mira mentioned, like, when we do research, we do a deep dive, which means I might stand up here and sound like an expert on some product, but it's because at some point somebody came to me and said, I want you to work on this. Go learn everything you can. Like at one point I worked on a video app, and I had to learn everything there was to learn about video editing. So I now have this body of knowledge about video editing, and I don't work on that anymore. So it is kind of fun that I get to, I studied designers, I've worked on Illustrator, I've worked on a whole bunch of products. And like Mira said, a lot of that is an exercise in failure. You work on a lot of what we call a V1 product, a version 1 product. It means you've got an idea, or somebody has an idea, and you get to run with it, and you build and you build and you build, and then one day somebody may come along and say, let's ship that product, let's put it out there in the world. Or they may say, you know what, we don't feel like that's the right product for our student products, and then it goes away. So in my career, I've worked on 11 V1 products. These are products that we have started from the beginning, tried to build them out, and some of them have shipped, like maybe 2 or 3, but most of them have either gotten, the information has gotten rolled into other products, and that's okay, because if you specialize in sort of these innovative new things, then sometimes it doesn't work out, and you can't be afraid of that. The one product that I'm working on now, or I'm working on a whole host of things, but the product area that I'm working on now is so far mostly successful. Anyone here photographer, like to take pictures? Likes to take pictures, yeah. Do you use software to edit them? What do you use?
Photoshop.
Photoshop?
Lightroom.
So I work on Lightroom. Yes, I work on Lightroom. So I work with a team of designers. It's an awesome place to work because Lightroom is insanely cool and powerful, but it is it easy to use? Not so much. Not so much. Any one of you, any Lightroom users remember the first time you used Lightroom? What did you think?
I couldn't think. It was really confusing.
It is really confusing. It's confusing for a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, the team that built it is not going to be very prepared to understand that it's hard to use because they understand it. And it's really hard for people to abstract themselves from the problem space of what it's like to be a new user. How do you unknow the things that you already know? And be able to communicate that in an effective way to be able to build a design that will support a new user. So about 8 months ago, the director for the Photoshop Lightroom area came to me and said, we have to increase our user base for Lightroom. We need to have more users. We have a lot of professional users. They're required to use this product because it's really the only game in town. But we want more people like you guys to use this product. People who care about photography but aren't going to be doing it for a living. How do we do that? And he said, we think the problem is that it's hard to learn. And so there we go. We have a design problem. Lightroom is complicated and it's hard to learn. So what can we do to make it easier to learn? Or to make it more fun to learn? Or to make it even just something that people are willing to take the time to learn? Whether, there's all sorts of ways to approach that problem. So we basically had a really general problem. Now, one of the first things that everyone at Adobe seems to point to when you ask, how do I make something easier to learn, is let's put tutorials in there. And tutorials are great. Tutorials are awesome. But if you get scared the first time you see the product and you go, whoa, I don't need to learn that, then it doesn't matter how many tutorials you have. So my first inclination is to look at the product and say, well, what does it feel like to be a new user? The very first thing I do when I take on any new project is I take it off of my machine and then I reinstall it from scratch, or I reinstall it on a different machine so that I'm not, like I don't lose all my work. And I step through and I take a snapshot of every step of that beginning process so that I understand what it's like. And that's great. And these are some screenshots from the first time I ever did that with Lightroom. And I was like, whoa, this is serious, like being in a cockpit. I don't know what to do next. So I proposed, and then we have been working towards this sort of plan that really typifies how we do research, user research. We start out by observing new users. I took a group of 7 users who were all compelled to use Lightroom for various reasons, because they had lots of photos and they cared about photography, but they had never used it before. And I gave it to them. I said, here, but I want to watch you use it. And so we watched these guys starting the product for the first time. We didn't give them any assistance. It was not an interview. I actually just quietly sat and watched them. And they would like turn to me and ask me questions, and I'd say, just figure it out, write down the questions that they asked. And I would spend a lot of time sort of identifying where they got stuck without helping get them unstuck. So I ended up with a big bucket of problems that they had. And then the next part is actually sort of what gets lost a lot of times when people who don't really do research for a living are doing this, is they'll just go and try and solve those problems. Like the first screen, they don't know to click the import button, so we'll put a big circle around the import button, and then they'll know to click the import button. But what we do next is actually more about interpretation. In that first definition of research that Mira talked about, interpreting information is actually one of the most important parts of research. It's not just gathering the information, but then interpreting it in such a way that you can create some sort of a model around what that information means and how that relates to like the human brain, how that relates to how people think. So it's not enough to say that the import button needs a big circle around it and say import here. People have to intuitively know that the way this application works is that you would want to import photos. And if you don't know that importing photos is important, then all of the text in the world telling you to import isn't really what you need. What you need is to intuitively know, hey, I'm in a photo app, so I should put my photos in it. Right? It kind of makes sense. So we basically spent a whole bunch of time observing all of these problems that we saw and tried to make a model of what an effective onboarding experience would be. And part of what I wanted to do, because I've been at Adobe a long time, and every couple of years these problems crop up with a different product. So 8 months ago it was Lightroom, now it's Photoshop. How do we fix the onboarding problem? So I made a model of sort of the 3 steps to effective onboarding. Now, onboarding is a complicated problem. And I've kind of learned in the time, I know you guys can barely read this, sorry. I like this really thin font, but it's probably not the most useful thing in the world. Anyway, one of the things that you learn from working in a big company is that executives like really small, tidy problems. And so I said, okay, we'll come up with a simple model that they can say, yes, let's do it, right? So if I give them a big complex model, they don't want to see it. But 3 important steps. Discovery. You have to know what the applications do. In order to, you have to know that these applications exist. People who are editing in Photoshop may not know that Lightroom even exists, right? Everyone's heard of Photoshop, that's an easy one. But if you don't know that Lightroom exists, you're not going to go learn about it. And if you're not going to learn about it, you're probably not going to pay us money for it. So understanding that applications exist and understanding how to differentiate. What's the difference between Photoshop and Lightroom? They're actually wildly different, although they do some of the same things. But if we don't explain that to users right at the beginning, then how are they supposed to be successful? Step 2, initial use. The very first minute that you open an application, you ask yourself a question, is this the right application for me? I download apps on my phone all the time. I can tell within a few swipes whether this is the application that's going to do the thing I needed. Or I'm going to be able to figure out whether or not I have if I have all the technology to make it work. I need to know, is this the application for me? So if our applications don't tell you a little bit about themselves when you first start using them, then you might be stuck and not know. We also have to make sure that we're telling you what your path is going to be. Is this going to be a year-long investment, or am I just using this briefly? Like, understand the whole system that we're using here. And then the last thing is ongoing use. There has to be a way for me to go from that first use, I'm going to bring in a couple of pictures and play around with it, for me to then slowly grow my skills at the point that I need to grow them. So this is a really big one. Like, a tutorial at the beginning doesn't do me any good. I don't even know what the app looked like. Give me a tutorial when I'm ready for it. Explain things to me as I approach them. So we're trying to get the executives at Adobe to understand that it's not just about more tutorials, but smarter tutorials that maybe come to you when you're ready for them, that explain deeper functionality as you go, and that understand how much information you already know. So those are my sort of like ideas around effective onboarding. They seem to like those ideas. So we proposed a very simple proposal of, to address this stuff in Lightroom, let's start out with an integrated product tour. Right in the app. You open up the app and it tells you a little bit about itself. It's a little tour. It's kind of like got music, it's fun, something like that. Coach marks or tooltips or whatever you want to call them. Something that says, like, this is where the import button is. So at the beginning I showed that screen. It's kind of the gray screen. Like import, this is what we do to tell people what to do. It's just like a gray screen. It's boring. So we want something, a nice integrated sort of, like, here's the import button, big blue text or something like that. A simplified import experience. For Lightroom, this was very product specific, but make that first use fun and pretty and nice and enjoyable. Don't make it tedious. And then, this is a big one. I said to them, we can't just fix this stuff by packing stuff at the beginning. You got to make the product easier to use, and part of that is reducing features. It's a hard thing to get a product team to accept, but sometimes their features weren't great features to begin with. They weren't successful. People aren't using them. It just makes them more confusing. So we asked for a 5-year plan to slowly reduce features that we didn't think were effective, and to figure out, using quantitative data from what people are doing today, what features we could reduce. So we started out with some early sketches, and I'm going to show you a couple of these early sketches just to see what the process is. It's not like I go watch a bunch of users and then I go, poof, here's a big beautiful design. We start doing things called wireframes. Has anyone here actually done any design work where they've had to make wireframes? Okay, so this is like when you're first approaching a project, you just sketch it out. I start on a whiteboard. In fact, I do 90% of my design work on a whiteboard. And then if I really like an idea, we put it into a wireframe. And then if we like it a lot, then we make a big pretty design. So we started out, okay, we got Lightroom, there's a nice little tour in the middle, a little video, it's kind of cute, makes you happy. And then we have a little coach mark. See, we point out, look, add your photos here. And then we have this really great, much nicer, easier to use import experience that has your pictures shown. And we were really excited about this. We loved this direction. We presented it to the executives, and they were like, still too hard. Wanted it to be easier. They were like, Apple, Apple Photos about to come out. They've all seen pre-releases of it. They're like, that's easy. I want it to be easy. So back to the drawing board. And I'm going to show you a couple of sketches of where we actually landed and what we're about to build. And for what it's worth, I've asked the camera guy not to take pictures of this. I've asked you not to take pictures of this too, because we haven't built this yet. Fingers crossed. But I'm pretty excited about where we landed. So, full screen video, pretty music, just telling you what Lightroom is. It doesn't need to show you Lightroom. It's just like, this is what Lightroom's all about. 30 seconds long, because who wants to watch a big long video? This is quick and easy. If it happens that you've already got Lightroom on and this is just an upgrade for you, then maybe this video is actually what's new in Lightroom. So you get a fun, easy sense of what we're doing next. And it's just another shot from one of the videos that we have. Again, showing sort of what Lightroom's all about by watching somebody else use it. And then import. Make it pretty, make it easy, make it fun. It scans your computer, looks for your photos, and then offers to import them. You don't have to push any buttons, it's just right there. And this screen, you know, it's got some options. It adjusts based on what you have on your machine. It's, like I said, it looks for, like in, I guess in this view, it sees that you have a camera plugged in, sees that your My Photos folder is filled with photos. Yay, we're going to grab those photos. In this view, if you happen to have an aperture library, it offers to import that for you. So super visual, really lightweight and easy to use. You say, yes, I want to import them. We show you your photos, because guess what? You're doing this because you love your photos. So we really wanted to tap into people's emotional connection with their photos. We know that some people want to do more. Current Lightroom users, they want to nerd out on keywords and stuff like that. That's available to you, but you can close that up and not see it at all. This is what it looks like if everything's selected. All you have to do is come to the screen, hit the big blue button that says import all photos, and you are done. And yeah, so I guess that's our design, and that's where we're going with the next version of Lightroom, and that provides a sort of a platform and inspiration for redesigning the entirety of Lightroom to make it a much more approachable app, because we've introduced this idea that what we're doing is not something nerdy and hard to do, but can be beautiful and can be sort of inspirational for the user as we go. So, you know, we're starting in a process. Hopefully, over the next 3 releases of Lightroom, this stuff will happen. I guess some of you will see since you use Lightroom. And yeah, so that is the future of onboarding in Lightroom.
Great. Thanks, Sharma. I certainly can't wait. I have a very hard time using Lightroom. Even though I work at Adobe, you think all of us are like experts in all of our software, but we're not. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I can tell you a little bit about how we approach research in Adobe Research, and I guess the fundamental difference between our approaches is that we tend to, we're a group of computer scientists, so we tend to approach it from a, let's build some interesting new technology that can solve one of these problems that users are having with our products. And I'll show you a few different projects. Some of them are my own, some of them are some of my colleagues, just to give you a sense for the breadth of the kind of work that goes on in the labs. Since we've been talking a lot about onboarding and learning, it seemed natural to talk to you about some of our learning projects. And so personally, I've been involved in trying to make our products in general easier to use through interactive tutorials and through other techniques too. Like we've also built games, trying to explore how games can help people learn how to use our software. So I'm going to show you one of these projects here. This is a tutorial player. Tutorial player is actually an iPad app, and it looks like any tutorial website you might see on the web. The main difference is that it actually connects to your desktop. So in this video, this is Photoshop, and this is tutorial player on an iPad. And each step in the tutorial actually has a button associated with it, the Show Me button. If you click on that button, that step will actually execute in Photoshop. And the idea here is that with this interactive tutorial experience, you can get a quick look at what a workflow, or what a tutorial actually does. You don't have to actually do all the steps yourself before you can tell how it works. And you know, there's a strong connection between the two, so that if, for example, a dialogue pops up, the tutorial player waits for you until you close that dialogue. The connection is also, so one thing we want people to do is actually do the steps themselves, because if you just press on these buttons, you're not really going to learn how to use the software. But we know it's important for the tutorial to keep up with you as you use the software. So one of the key things about this is that it's not just one way, you know, I send the commands this way, but it's actually both ways. It's listening to you and trying to keep up with you. And we thought this was really important because we know that people get stuck using the software, and so having tutorials that can follow along with them and help them out when they can't figure out where is that tool, where is that panel that this is asking me to do. This can help you do that. So this is actually an app, an iPad app you can download today. So those of you who are using Photoshop, I definitely recommend you check it out. It's it'll show you like some new techniques you might not know about, and it can hopefully help you learn about tools you didn't know about. Another problem that I think we need to solve in the world is the lots of photos problem. In general, the lots of stuff problem, I would say, not just lots of photos. And so on the research team, it's just blank. On the research team, we've been trying to, why doesn't it let me stop? There we go. Pause. So on the research team, what we've been trying to do is say, okay, people come home from vacation and they have 500 photos or maybe 1,000 photos, and I want to just quickly share 20 photos with my friends, and maybe 20 photos with my colleagues, 20 photos with my family. How do I do that? It's really hard. I have to go sift through all of those 500 photos. Is there some automatic way that software can help me? How can the software help me? How can it pick out those 20 best photos? And what's interesting is that there's actually no absolute 20 best, because the 20 best for your family are probably slightly different than the 20 best for your friends, right? Maybe you don't show those party pictures to your family, and maybe, there's photos you definitely don't want to share with your friends as well. And so what we thought about is, well, when people create these sets of photos that they share, they often have strong criteria about what that set should be. Can we actually get them to tell us what that criteria is, and then based on that criteria generate a set of possible 20? And it's okay if they're not perfect, as long as they can start with that 20 and then refine that set. That will already be a win. And so that's what I'm going to show you here. We built a prototype. And so what you're seeing at the top, is it's playing good. It's kind of like a search bar, just like you would see on Google. And what the user is typing is just some text. They want some photos of Axel, a few of Jessica, some of Cairo, a few of Oswan, and 20 in total. And what the system will do is it will look at the entire collection and use constraints to actually create one possible set that satisfies these constraints. Now, because we know this set is not going to be perfect, we allow the users to actually use each photo as a pivot into the rest of the collection. So here what you're seeing is this person is adding more photos with that person in the yellow. His name is Axel. So more photos of Axel. And so it's one way to add more photos to this collection, or more photos from this time. And it's another way to kind of pivot back into that collection without having to look at all of them. So this is a prototype we've built. It's still sitting on the shelf. We haven't actually productized it. But Lightroom would be the perfect place for it, right? I mean, Lightroom is the place where people have these giant collections and the place where they go when they want to create some subset. So we actually tried this for music as well. This is what you're seeing here in the video. The approach actually is not just for photos, it's for other things. So some of you maybe make playlists. There's the playlist for running, the playlist for the car, the playlist for the party. And you can describe what you want for those playlists. Maybe a little bit of rock, no songs with words if you're trying to, maybe some of you listen to music while you code. Definitely words are not great then. And you can tell the computer what they are, and it can propose, a playlist for you that satisfies these constraints. So it's a prototype. Hopefully we'll see it in one of these products soon. Another direction that I'm particularly passionate about is thinking about natural language interaction. And so I'm going to play this video for you, and it has audio, so I'm going to be quiet for a minute.
Everyone takes pictures, but photo editing can be hard. You have to learn how to adjust colors, select objects, and improve the lighting. We have created a system that lets you talk to your computer and tell it what you want to do with your images. If you wanted to improve the sunset, you could say, darken the midtones at the top, so that the effect is only applied to that area and tonal range. A slider allows you to adjust the results. Now the ocean is too washed out, so increase the contrast at the bottom. That's better. You could also use touch gestures to describe where to edit. Blur in this direction. You can even use words that aren't specific to photo editing. For example, make it heavenly. Now let's do some work on this picture of my friends Sarah and John. One thing you can do is teach the system about what's in the picture. This is a shirt. And with face detection, it's easy to indicate who is here. This is Sarah. This is John. Now you can refer to those things as you make edits. For instance, change the color of the shirt. Now Sarah's face looks a little too flushed. Decrease the saturation on Sarah. Both of them look a little dark. Brighten Sarah and John. There we go. A few gesture marks, and crop to here. To finish, you can apply popular effect filters. Make it retro.
So this is, our experimentation into what it would be like to use natural language for photo editing. I'm guessing, you have all at least maybe experimented with Siri or seen others use Siri. Can I get a show of hands? Yes? You know what I'm talking about when I say Siri. So I think natural language is going to increasingly be a common part of our world and how we think about interacting with computers. And when it comes to trying to make these complex interfaces actually easier, I think it's a really interesting approach, and one we're very excited about pursuing more broadly, not just inside of photo editing, but across all of Adobe's products. In the spirit of making things easier to use and enabling a wider variety of people to be creative, I want to show you the next project, which is called Paint Can. This is not one of my projects. This is a project from one of my colleagues, Holger Vindemuller. But its intent is to really bring back that joy that all of us experienced when we were kids in painting and make us all feel like we can be professional painters.
You want to go first?
No,
I would not consider myself a creative person.
Definitely not artistic. I'm not good at drawing.
I was far more creative when I was little.
I draw all sorts of things, like butterflies and some more stuff.
I actually used to draw a lot when I was a kid. There were just other things in life that took over.
I wish I could paint and draw. It would be amazing. Okay, let's do it. So we'll open it. Smile, we're doing you.
Oh, so now you're gonna paint over it. Whoa, okay.
Let's just hit some buttons and see what happens.
Woo. And do I just put my finger on it? Oh, my life has changed.
You just realize you can do it manually. When you pick your own brushes and whatnot, that's definitely cool.
Ooh, I like that. Wow. Oh, can I zoom? Oh, whoa. Then you can add more detail. That's awesome. We're artists.
We're artists. We did that.
I don't want to talk, I just want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Color or something.
Yeah, I would totally do that.
Ta-da! Proud hands that are painting. This is cool. Can I send this to myself?
I don't consider myself a skilled visual artist, and I feel like I just created art.
So Paint Can is also available. You can also download it and try it on one of your devices on your, I think it's now soon to be on iPhone as well. But I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Paint Can. Paint Can was my colleagues, it was, you see this professionally made video and you think, wow, this is really cool. Adobe's like investing a lot of time into making really awesome creative tools. But in fact, this is the blood, sweat, and tears of one man who was really passionate about making tools that make creativity more widely available. And he's had this path for multiple years now, and he's been developing products, prototypes, just like the ones I showed you, one at a time, and testing them with users and seeing what sticks and what works really well. And eventually he got to the point where he said, you know what, let's make an app out of that. But before this, it was actually a desktop app, and it had a lot of different brushes, and it was too complicated. And you know, by getting it in front of people, he really found out what it was about it that was working really well. And after that round of prototypes and evaluations, he finally got to the point of creating this app. And you know, and now we're doing that second part, that quantitative evaluation, trying to really see who's using it and how are they using it, and you know, who is finding it the most engaging. So, you know, very different model than when you have a very big product team that's you know, on a path to you know, make professional photo editing easier. So I want to kind of wrap up. I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to skip over my next video and just kind of wrap up with our conclusions, which are, there's really kind of two main conclusions we want you to take away from this. One of them is that Sharma and I had very, very different paths, and yet we ended up at the same place, doing some of the same work, and that we love our jobs. I mean, both of us have been at Adobe for a really long time by the tech industry standards. And it's partly because we have these amazing jobs where we get to wear lots of hats. That's why we picked this photo. You know, I get to write code, I get to present, I get to read, I get to write, I get to work with students. I have a good number of interns every year. And it's wonderful. If one thing gets boring, I move on to the next. And it keeps things really interesting. And I also have the freedom to pick projects that I'm passionate about. So I think the same is true.
In the time that I've been at Adobe, I've gotten to know about video software, about photography software, about drawing software, about music. For a while there, I was studying music and how people select music. So, and I get to dip into this thing and that. Sometimes I'm doing design, sometimes I'm doing research, sometimes I'm working with architects to think about, you know, how we should build a platform out that supports all sorts of long-term goals. So there are lots of different ways to get there, but as long as you're sort of open to the idea that your career is this constant evolution where you're picking stuff up as you go, you get the opportunity to sort of see things at a really high level and then dip down and actually make stuff and then come back up and see them at a high level. It's a lot of fun. So yes, we wear many hats.
So with that, we want to open it up for questions, but we also want to acknowledge our colleagues. So, you know, this is not just the two of us. These are a lot of these projects that you've seen are collective effort from many colleagues. So we'll open it up. Thank you so much for listening. I hope
I was just wondering, you got your PhD and your master's degree, right? And if
Yes.
I wanted to go into a field similar, do I have to pick a specialization? And if I do, what would I pick?
Do you have to have a PhD?
So, related question. So, first off, do you need a PhD? And second, what should your specialization be? So, I guess let me answer the easier one first, which is that any PhD is going to be specialized in something. So, you will have to pick a thesis topic, right? And even aside from the thesis topic, you're going to have to pick a general area, right? So if you want to do computer graphics, which is what I was really excited about, even within computer graphics, there are a lot of areas, right? There's animation. So if you're really passionate about animation, want to make the new best way to animate characters, or the new best way to animate clothes. Like clothes are still actually really hard to animate. So it turns out that's a lot of, if you love math and physics, like animation and simulation are great areas. So yes, you will have to pick a specialization, but you don't have to pick it until fairly late in the game.
And it also doesn't keep you from working on new projects. So,
right.
I mean, certainly I have a PhD in cognitive neuropsychology, and that has nothing to do with photos. So, you know, a lot of, you spend spend a lot of time learning on your feet. So your PhD proves that you can learn on your feet, and then you get to go and do it over and over again.
Yes. Yes, definitely. So then the question, do you need a PhD? It depends on what you want to do. So if you want to be in a research lab the way I am, in a research lab inside of a company, or if you want to be a professor doing research in this space, then yes, you need a PhD. If you want to, and Sharma would tell you that if you want to do research, it also is helpful to have a PhD. And she can tell you a little bit more about why she thinks it's important. You don't need it. I mean, if you want to do design and you want to do user research in a company, you don't need a PhD. There are lots of people who have a master's. For example, I would recommend a master's generally. I wouldn't say that just with the bachelor's you have the skills, mostly because I feel like in the bachelor's you take a lot of general purpose classes. And so in a CS program, you guys are all in CS here? Yes? No? Mostly? Okay. You're going to take a lot of your kind of basic CS classes. It's really in your master's program where you're going to really focus more and take these more specialized classes. But maybe Sharma can chime in about, because my group is all PhDs, so I don't have a great look at like what a person with a master's can do versus one with a PhD, but there's a lot more variety in your group.
Yeah, I used to manage the user research group at Adobe, and that was the more product-based research, not the nerdy research.
The tech research, yeah.
And as a general rule, I hired people with PhDs, but I do not think that is the only path to get there. Some of the people who I admire the most that do this work have master's degrees in ECI. In terms of design, I mean, no PhD necessary, but you probably do want to get a specialized art degree. So, for sure, that's important. In terms of research, though, or to do more of the research strategy stuff like I tend to do, the purpose of getting a PhD or a master's in some sort of science is really important because you understand the sort of method by which you explore and solve problems, which it's not enough to just learn how to do the research. Like, I can teach you guys how to interview, but if you don't have a basic understanding of how to problem solve in science, then you're interviewing and you're just gathering information, but you don't understand necessarily how to structure that information and how to then do the next step to answer questions in a different way. So I kind of think that having a good basis in science is important.
One of the things that a PhD teaches you is how to take information and organize it into a way that it makes sense into a framework, to build a framework. And I feel like that's the thing you learn in grad school.
Yeah.
And you could probably find it in a master's program, but I think it's not necessarily a requirement, right? So many of them you're still just taking courses rather than really trying to like take a body of work, put it together, and think about where are the open spaces in this body of work, that need to be solved. So I know that's kind of an abstract way to think about it, but
There's also that one little element about getting a PhD in that you are doing something where nobody has the answer. And that's kind of important in software too. If you're sitting down to design or to build a piece of code that somebody's already built, then you're not doing it right. So the link between the innovation involved in research and getting a PhD and being responsible, like here you are, I mean, I was a 27-year-old, like kind of filled with self-doubt, and I have to write this paper that's supposed to say something to the world that nobody knows. And that's scary and it's hard, but it's also pretty inspirational. So.
I would also say that, I mean, for both of us, we went straight through, so we never took a break to work. And there is lots of value in, especially if you're not sure if this is something you want to do, in actually going and working and then coming back. You can always come back and get a PhD. And I found some of my grad student friends who had gone out and had worked for a few years were much more like directed and focused in grad school than I was. So
We're doing internships.
but definitely also do lots of internships if you're excited about this space and really think that like, maybe you love art or design and visuals and, you like programming, but you don't want to be writing like server code your whole life. which is also great. Server code's great, but like, it's not as
100 feet. Turn left.
it's not as visual. Then getting some experience with art classes or design classes is actually really valuable. Like I actually personally wish I had more design skills under my belt. So.
That kind of segues into what I was going to ask. In this field, like all the technology changes so fast. Do you find yourself spending time outside of work, keeping up to date with technology, or do you find that it comes as nature of the work?
For me, it's part of work. I mean, I feel like my job is to know what the cutting edge is, and so I see it as part of my job. That said, I'm not a first adopter, so I'm not the person that has the iWatch or whatever the new smartwatches are. So yeah, I guess, yeah.
I mean, the nice thing about being at a company like Adobe is that they make sure that I have a current iPhone, a current Mac. Like, I'm going to get the technology that I need to, like, at one point, I was like, you guys want me to design for both iPhone and iPad, but I don't own an iPad. And they're like, here's an iPad, so like, that's kind of rad. Yeah, I mean, part of research, the first stage of research for a designer is not going to people, but to see what else is out there. And so I spent a lot of time, last year a year ago when I was doing the video project, I knew every iPhone and iPad-based video editing app that there was, and of course there's probably 10 new ones this year, but, so we spent a lot of time looking and finding out what's out there, and a lot of times I'm finding out about them, and then my friends are like, oh, did you use this crazy new app? And I'll be like, yeah, I had to research it.
This is kind of a broad question, but in terms of coding and design put together, how do you feel about Dreamweaver?
Boy.
I'm not supposed to say bad things about our company.
There's always a question that like totally takes me by surprise. So this one this time. So Dreamweaver, I mean, Dreamweaver is an old product. It's been around for probably 15 years at least. So, and Dreamweaver is designed for programmers. I mean, it's not designed for designers. To contrast, I think Fireworks. Oh, I'm totally going in a different. Yeah. So I guess I would say Dreamweaver is really kind of an old school product designed for very particular workflow. I don't use it to do HTML editing. I write my own. I use usually a text editor, so something like Sublime, or Adobe has one called Brackets that's like a new HTML-focused editor. So I guess that's my feeling about Dreamweaver. As far as like design, are you asking like what's a good product for doing design and development at the same time?
Right. Or like linking and bridging the two.
So that's one thing that's nice about Dreamweaver is that you get the live view. But I don't know what the hottest new product is for. I mean, yeah.
Do you guys use balsamic? I mean, it's wireframing.
I don't, because I'll be honest with you, I can do something more effectively in Illustrator. And I feel like balsamic it's like trying to hem me in a little bit. I mean, I can do it on cocktail napkin, and I have no problem taking a photo of that and showing that to somebody. So I don't need a tool to do it, but I don't tend to think that wireframing, because I'm not an architect doing like super high level, like super complex architecture. I'm trying to get an idea across, right? So that's all I need to do. If somebody needed to really represent every single possible state, I could see that would be valuable, but I think you'd be more enriched if you just invested in spending a lot of time in Illustrator and making the components.
I guess my highest comment would be you should use whatever tool makes sense to you and whatever tool is easiest for you. Hopefully some of those are Adobe tools. Otherwise, we're going to lose our jobs. That's how it goes. I had one more thought about Dreamweaver, which is I have used it when doing production level programming. So I think when it's often the most useful is if you've got some huge back-end server database with lots and lots of websites, and you've got to or lots and lots of web pages, and you have to kind of keep them all organized, and so it's really good for that. But as far as the development environment itself, I don't particularly love it. So a lot of my HTML development is actually in Chrome with a JavaScript console and with a text editor. I know it's kind of simple, but
And extract now doesn't it extract the CSS that you might need for that?
yeah, but you're still gonna have to write your JavaScript and all this kind of stuff. And CSS I'm not very good at anyway, so. You guys will find better information on the web than asking.
That is where technology is changing. Thankfully, I don't write any code, so I don't.
But I should say that there is, so people who can do design and development are really, really rare and are really, I think, in a unique position because design programs or design departments love people who can code because often it means that they can build their own prototypes without help from an engineer. And that's hugely valuable because oftentimes when you need to convince somebody, hey, this is the right way to do this, having a working prototype is way better than having static screens.
Yeah, just to add to that, though, I think the tricky part is that it doesn't, for a designer to learn to write code, it's not the same as for a designer to become a computer scientist, right? Becoming a computer scientist has all this stuff that we talked about today. It's like research and understanding, it's sort of like investing in technology. Whereas a designer that learns CSS so that they can make their own prototypes, they're not like learning to do what Mira does. They're learning to write some pretty simple code. And so they're focused on their design skills, and that's why they're valued, because they're great designers who can also make prototypes. I have not met that many engineers in the world that can also do design, partly because, again, it's like design is not just making stuff look pretty. I mean, you have to really invest in understanding design systems and understanding design thinking and stuff like that. So that's where it's a struggle. So if you want to do both, take some design classes too. I guess that's kind of the key point is that both, like if you want to do really cool stuff like what Mira is doing, and you really want to invest in your own ability to make your own, like you want to do a startup, take some design classes, understand some design principles, because that's it's much harder than people think.
Right. It's really easy to do poor design, let's put it that way.
It's people keep proving this.
Yes.
Real quick, do you think you could briefly maybe like walk us through like a typical day of like a UI UX, either like researcher or like I guess in your relative positions, just to get an idea in contrast to say like a software developer, which we probably are more accustomed to. What would that look like?
Do you want to, I mean, tell them about your day and then I can talk about my day and then we can hypothesize about the regular, the day of an engineer.
So a user researcher is typically, again, we tend to work in chunks of like 3 to 4 week projects. So we start out with understanding what the questions are, and we spend a lot of time talking to executives about really what the questions are. Like people come to us and they say, I want to know if this button is going to work, and I'm like, I don't know, what's it supposed to do? Like, I don't know. So we then try and back them out and say, okay, tell us what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Don't worry about what I'm going to test. What are you trying to solve? What's your goal? So that's how we got to this, like, we want more people to use Lightroom. Right? So we spend a lot of time really homing in on what the real problems are, and then we devise a way to study it. So I tend to put together pretty short and simple plans. I had somebody come to me a couple weeks ago and say, we want to understand if users have a good experience when they do X. And I'm like, okay, well, let's find out like what the experience is and figure out how to test it. So we put together a plan. Then we have to figure out how to find the people to test it with. I always start internal because there's no point in wasting a bunch of people's time and money because we pay people to come in and get tested, like test these things. So I start internally. I find people either who use the software or who don't. I test it out with them. One of my first Lightroom customers actually works in CTL, or I guess did, but anyway. So yeah, I spent a lot of time meeting Adobe employees and making them my guinea pigs. And so then you do that internally, and I spend a lot of time just extracting information, just observing the world. I did this when I was a neuropsychologist too, right? Like, I didn't start with a big experiment. I started with, I'm gonna just sit and talk to you and watch you and see if, like, I was working with stroke patients for a while, see what kind of cognitive deficits I'm noticing just in having a conversation. So just being really observant about how people work on things. You use that to formulate an experiment, you run your experiment, you do a lot of interpretation, and then you have to find a way to communicate it to people. So that's sort of if you're doing an experiment that's going to take a month, that's kind of how it's going to happen. Figuring out a way to communicate it to people is the hardest part. That's why I sort of showed that like 3-dot slide. Like, I did a whole bunch of work and I learned a whole lot, and I don't need to show you everything. I just need you to focus on these 3 statements. So breaking down the problem. So that's kind of what a researcher does. And they do that over and over again. Spend a lot of time socializing ideas. I've done work where I've then spent months just going and telling people about the stuff I learned. In fact, I did a project, it was like 5 years ago, where we created this really cool model of designers and developers and tried to explain how, like, there's not like this one kind of designer and one kind of developer, but they create this range. Anyway, I spent a year just giving that talk to people around Adobe. And I mean, every once in a while someone's like, hey, remember that word? Yeah. So I go present it again.
So, my job is a little bit different. At any given moment, I work on about 5 projects. Like, it goes up and down, but around 5 projects simultaneously. And each project kind of goes through many different stages. So, at the earliest stages is usually the research stage. And in the research stage, it's often actually with the student. I almost never work by myself. And we have a very great internship program. And so the student comes in, these are all graduate student interns, so they're all doing research or learning how to do research. They come in and we spend 3 months really intensively developing an idea. So to give you an example, I've been interested in this idea of visualizing clickstream data. So as you know, we all log how people use websites. This is very complicated data, especially when you have a lot of users. So if you wanted to visualize how all the people who come to Adobe's website, how they're using it, it's a big mess. So the problem was, can we come up with a better way to visualize this data? So we spent, first we spent 1 summer trying to visualize that data, had some initial ideas, they weren't very strong. The following year, another intern came, we came up with some different ideas. Those were a little better. So then we started testing those, and for that, so in that case, the actual work is I may do programming, the student is most likely doing most of the programming. When we prototype on the first draft of the idea, we'll usually do a user study where we bring them in, we say, okay, here's a new visualization, here's a different way to do it that's equally good or the current kind of best way to do it. We give them specific tasks and say, okay, try to do these tasks with these 2 different visualizations and see what happens, right? Maybe they do better in some tasks with one visualization. They do better with another way, with the previous version for a different set of tasks. So that's kind of one cycle of the project. Once we feel kind of like we have something good, we then go to the product teams and also work with the design team that's working very closely with the product teams. And we say, hey, we came up with this cool thing. We think it's better in these ways. What do you guys think? Is it solving a problem you're interested in? Hopefully it is. Hopefully you've actually talked to them before you get to this point, so you know what's important to them. In this particular case, for example, we're talking with the Adobe Analytics team. They do a lot of big data analysis and visualization. We know that in 2016, they're going to be looking at this problem. And so we have this year, basically, the rest of this year, to really make some solid headway on this project. And so come next year, they're going to come to us and say, okay, we talked about this, what should we put in the product? And that's when we would work with the design team as well, and figure out, which pieces of what we've created make sense, and how we do that. And so that's a lot of fun too, like working with the product team. Sometimes I even do, engineering on those product code bases. Depends a little bit on how many people are available and who's doing what. So it can really, vary
I've been trying to rope her into some Lightroom work.
Yeah, so there's Lightroom projects that we can do. So in terms of day-to-day, it's a lot of meetings because, you know, I'm working with lots of people. So it means like I have to keep them up to date on where we are. But I really like making things. That's why I became a computer scientist. And so I do always try to carve out a little bit of space for myself to just build something because it's a very different type of satisfaction than you know, building something big with a big team. I also go to conferences. One thing we actually didn't talk at all about is that part of my job is to go to conferences and publish the work we're doing and stay connected to the academic community. So I do that as well, which is fun too. I mean, you get to like travel and see colleagues from other companies. Like I have a lot of friends who work at Microsoft, for example, or who are professors at universities. And so it's a great way to connect to those people and see what they're doing.
Is that because of your PhD that like you're the point person for that, or is that maybe just like
Within the user research field, there's a lot of people who specifically like Kai, you know, there's a lot of academic conferences that people who do HCI work will go to. I don't, because I don't really like to get up in front of a bunch of people and talk. But I've given like AIGA talks and stuff like that. So,
But certainly, I think if you have a PhD, you're much more connected to that academic community because part of getting your PhD is publishing papers, learning how to publish papers, learning how to present them at conferences. So that's where that comes from. I think it's unusual for a master's student to publish a paper. I mean, it happens, but it's not a requirement certainly for getting a master's. Not part of the program. Okay.
well, thanks.
Great.
guys.
Thank you. If you have more questions, send them our way. We should have put our emails up here,
Yeah.
but Susan has them. I'm sure you guys know Susan. So if you have questions, please reach out. I mean, we're happy to talk.
I think one question that the students ask me, and I have a hard time answering, is sort of what do they study to get into some sort of a product design type of thing. If they're not completely focused on being a software engineer, and they're interested in more of a design or some combination, what's their course of study?
Right.
And your recommendation?
I would say, if you really are passionate about UI design, you want to be, let's say you still want to be a software engineer, but you want to be doing the front-end UI work, then getting some design experience can only be helpful to you in your career. If you don't want to be programming at all, you want to be doing the design work, then I think getting a bachelor's in computer science is only a benefit. Like, it's never going to hurt if you have a programming background, but you're definitely going to need another degree in some kind of design program.
Yeah, and there are lots of design programs. I think that the thing is finding a program that's going to emphasize design thinking and emphasize problem solving. Design is like 90% thinking and problem solving and like 10% making pretty pictures. It's just that the pretty pictures are what people go, ooh, and then they get really excited about it. So if you really care about design, I actually think psychology, library sciences, these are both things that help with the sort of problem solving thing. Information architecture classes, they start to think about, you learn some of this stuff. HCI is a great area that you're going to find in a more computer-oriented department. So I do work with a bunch of people who have degrees in HCI, both design and researchers. And I mean, honestly, like any kind of discipline, any science is, again, it's focused on problem solving in much the same way, which is why I think that we have this big channel from the science to this sort of problem solving space. But in the end, you also want to go take some like pretty, make it look pretty design classes.
I guess, yeah, I mean, to add just one more thing. So in the design group at Adobe, there isn't an engineering subset of that group. And so if you still if you want to continue to do programming, or just be doing more front-end work, then looking at internships, that are specifically emphasizing those skills, I think would be
We
good.
do have engineers now.
You do, right, and they do a lot of like, much more UI focused work, so.
Yeah, we have about, I don't know, 10 or 15 engineers,
Yeah.
right? That are all dedicated to doing cool, like, stuff that's supposed to be like design driven. We call it design driven, right? So we have a design, we have a concept for a really cool project. In fact, our entire fleet of iPad apps are made by.
Right. So in terms of courses, I guess I don't have a good sense for whether there's like courses that are specifically focused on, front-end UI type of implementation and design, but certainly taking those.
I would say that the one class that I would recommend everyone take if they care about design is typography. Understanding typography teaches you to understand why decisions get made around type. So you start to understand what, at the core of design, it's not about making it look pretty, it's about communicating something. So a serif font communicates something different from a sans serif font. I chose to use, what did I use here? Is that clean? And it is clean. This is actually an Adobe font called Adobe Clean. That's what we use for all of our UI, I think. Either that or it's helped out.
You should ask them. They may not know what the difference is.
Between a serif font is, do you guys know what is the difference between a serif?
to be held out of command.
Sorry?
It's too wide to be held out of command.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's clean.
It's definitely
Clean light.
because I
Yeah.
looked,
Yeah. So, so do you guys know the difference between a serif and a sans serif font size? Right. So, the choices that we make in terms of the fonts that we choose, the choices that we make in terms of the layouts that we choose, when we try to make something bold versus light, they both add emphasis. These are all really important things to do. So I would say if you care about design, take a typography class. And I would also say take a photography class because again, you're dealing with problem solving and composition in a way that's different from how you would lay out a website. So.
Great. Well, thank you all for hanging out.